I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we have Jolene from Custom Realty with us. Jolene is the owner of Custom Realty. So welcome to the show, Jolene.
Thank you.
Nice.
Really excited to be here.
That's good. They're not like nervous, freaking out?
Nope. Excited.
So you actually just won an award not too long ago, no?
I did in the end of last year through the Commercial Connect Real Estate. It's a brand new award that they did across Canada for women in real estate. And I won the Pacific section on that side. So they had picked, I think, about a dozen women across Canada. So It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big accolade. So nicely done.
Yeah, total surprise. I had no idea. So that was pretty cool.
So with you owning the company, like you have obviously more than one license. So, like, what licenses you got?
I have just a few. I have the trading license, a property rental management license, the managing brokerage license, and I also do have a strata license.
Which I'm sure, as of numerous people that I've spoke to, stay the hell away from strata. They're overworked and underpaid.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have one or two, but yeah, no, we definitely stay away.
Yeah, absolutely right. So you generally specialize more on the commercial, which is why we have you on today, because we do a lot of residential, since I specialize on the residential side and don't touch the commercial side. So
yeah.
Send everyone to you.
Absolutely. And I do not do any residential, so it works out really well. So all of our rentals and sales and leasing is all commercial focused.
Yeah, perfect. So that actually is a good segue, as it were. So if someone was wanting to start getting involved in investing in commercial, buying a place to rent to a business, I guess it would be, and that, what would be the best ways to start? I mean, do you start on a corner store or a coffee shop or a arcade or a warehouse? Like, where do you begin? What's the safest way to kind of dip your toe in?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely the safest way is to kind of start small, get comfortable on that side. And believe it or not, sometimes I actually suggest people go to residential investing first. Get used to having a small apartment or even a fourplex.
Okay.
That's sort of the best way, because then they can get used to what happens if people are turning over. Often people come to me having had no investment and they want to jump right in and buy a warehouse. Well, commercial investing can be quite scary because unlike residential, if there's a vacancy, it can last several months and you have quite high expenses. So when people come to me very green and wanting to get in, I often actually send them to the residential side and say, try and get a fourplex first on that side, because that's still considered a commercial investment.
Okay.
The fourplexes on that side, anything rental income producing. And then there's just a little bit more comfort once they get used to having the expenses or being months without rent, or maybe having a tenant trash the place, then they have to go in and fix it. Then they can kind of get comfortable with putting out expenses. And then from there, there's new retail strata developments coming up, just the smaller units, something that would be easier to rent.
Okay.
On that side.
Now, obviously, there's a little bit of differences between a commercial mortgage and a residential mortgage. I realize that you're not a broker, which we'll get Josh to come on there.
Yeah.
So we'll get him to, we'll kind of stay in our lane here.
Yeah.
But can you touch on just lightly what the difference is between a commercial and a residential mortgage? Are they a higher rate? Do you need more down? What's the score?
Yeah. So the commercial, definitely a different world, because it's encompassing a lot of different elements to it, as well as to what is going to cover the overhead costs on that. So typically down in a commercial, it's a significantly higher down payment than what you're going to see on a residential.
Okay.
And then they're not just wanting to look at what is the income you're bringing in, but then you have an environmental issues, and then you even have issues of, can you use the space how it's intended to be used? So the financing on commercial is a little bit more complicated than just, I have a job and therefore I can afford to pay for it on that side. So a little bit different. Definitely let Josh go into full detail, but in essence, you can expect to be paying a significant amount down payment. You'd want to be able to come to the table with 30 to 40%.
Oh, wow. That's significantly more.
Yeah. So it's not just, hey, I have 5%. Can I buy this warehouse? It's you need to come with significant money. Yeah.
And you're talking about environmental, just basically along those lines of if they're doing such as mechanics or something of this nature, I take something that would damage something, right?
Well, yeah, the environmental basically impacts the value of the land. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to buy, say, an industrial property, and you may feel it's valuable because you can, say you're a welder and you can use the space. If the land is contaminated, then the banks won't lend you the full amount of the value. So there's other variables that come in and impact that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a lot more complicated. I don't know how long it takes for your clients to get a mortgage in the residential, but commercial, you'd want to allow like 30 days for them to be able to process it.
Yeah. I mean, it can, for the residential, it can range. Depends on how quickly they answer all the questions that the mortgage brokers ask.
Right.
We had a couple of different mortgage brokers on. We had Chad and we had another guy just recently named Jordan on. And I am sure that they pull their hair out sometimes, just like, I've asked you for your pay stub and your job letter a month ago. That's why you don't have it yet.
Right.
Type of thing, right? So I think they can get it done fairly quickly, but probably 30 days, I'm sure they can get it done. But it does range mostly on if the questions are answered.
I guess it's a fair point. Yeah.
Right. So with people trying to purchase or lease, however it may work, on the commercial, what is the usual process? Like if you're walking down the street, you see a empty space that says either lease or for sale on it. How do I get that space to put my whatever store in there?
So you are the person
trying to lease it or
like it. You're like a tenant or a purchaser trying to
open up my shop.
Trying to open up your shop. You're going to have to expand on that. I'm sorry. You're going to have to expand on the question. You're trying to, you see a place that has a sign and you see your business there and you want to know, how do you lease it?
Yeah. Like if I'm going to open up a clothing store, for instance, if I see a place that's for lease.
Yeah. What are the steps?
What do I do?
Well, for starters, calling the person often on the sign won't always lead you to the place to lease on that side. So let's just say that we're working together and I'm helping you find these places. So when you find a place that you like, there's way more steps that go into it other than this place looks perfect for my store. There's quite a due diligence process on that side to go through to make sure that the zoning will work, you're allowed to use it. Obviously you have to make sure your numbers are aligned with the landlord for the offer on that side, and make sure parking requirements is a huge thing on that side. And then there's all sorts of different requirements an individual might have of parameters that you need to on that. But the actual process really is once you're connected to a landlord and you put an offer in, then it really just comes down to the due diligence.
Okay.
But every tenant, every use has completely different due diligence on that side. So what works for you might work for someone, might be different for someone else.
Okay. Yeah. Now with that, I've seen some businesses are for sale.
Yes.
Now, how does that work? Like, am I walking in buying everything that I'm looking at? Am I buying just the space? Am I buying just the business in the space? Like, what am I getting?
Okay, I understand the question now. So when businesses are for sale, there's actually different ways that they can be for sale. So either they could be the entire business, in which case you are buying the entity that currently operates the business. So with that, you're getting their whole skeletons in the closet, all of their accounting, all of their staff, their inventory. You're basically getting turnkey where you show up the next day and it's all yours. Another way of doing it is just buying the assets. So you're not really buying the entity. You're really just buying the equipment and the systems. Maybe some of the employees will transfer over on that side. So there's different ways of doing it. Often the person selling wants to get rid of everything. They want to get rid of their entity. They want to clear their hands. Yeah. They want to say, I want nothing, unless it's tied to other businesses. But let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, business owns that person owns that one business only and nothing else is attached.
Okay.
They want to just get rid of it. If on that side where the buyer coming in, they typically don't want all of the meat and potatoes. They don't want your history. I don't know you from before. I don't want your 5 years history of a time that you had this big incident that happened. I just want access to your systems. So that's kind of a high level, typical way of seeing it. But there's all different reasons why people want to sell the whole business company or just the assets. And then on top of that, sometimes people assume to buy a business that you're good and golden to go, but then there's the lease aspect. So who owns the building? Do you have to negotiate a lease? What part of that as well? So it's quite an intricate process to buy a business.
Now, you're saying with negotiating the lease, are you negotiating these two things separately? So if someone has we used a clothing store as an example.
Yeah.
You're buying that arbitrary, the name, all the clothes inside, all that stuff. And then you have to negotiate separately with whoever owns the building as well? Are these two separate negotiations? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would put in your offer to say, I wish to buy this business to the person that you're buying it from. And then part of the due diligence would be under the condition that I'm able to get a lease for X amount of time at X amount of terms.
Okay.
So that becomes part of your condition. So if you're not able to secure a lease that works for you, then you wouldn't be able to close on the deal.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't want to buy a business where you lose the lease.
Yeah.
And you also have to be really careful because in a lot of people's leases, which you could talk with LeBeau on this even, is that there are some commercial leases where there is a clause in there that any major change of ownership will actually void the lease.
Okay.
And that was there was a big incident that happened years ago in Langley with an unknown business where they sold their business and they were really excited. And then the landlord came and said, you actually weren't allowed to do this without our approval.
Oh, wow.
And kicked them out of the space.
Wow. Yeah.
Because they were in breach. So you have to make sure that when, that's part of the due diligence process of is this person allowed to sell it? I need to see the current lease, but I also need an assignment. So there's quite a lot of components to it.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot more moving parts than there is generally for most residential. So so now a lot of people try to go at this on their own. I mean, that's what you've just touched at kind of seems like a bit of an idiotic idea, to be perfectly honest. So hiring a professional such as yourself, how does that work as far as commissions? On the residential side, a buyer, it's free to use a real estate advisor. So to not use one for a buyer on the residential side seems a little dumb. As the old quote goes, just because you can throw a punch doesn't mean you can box.
Yeah.
It seems that you probably really want to use a professional for a commercial since there's essentially guaranteed 2 negotiations about to happen. And you need to know all of it. How does it work for hiring a professional?
Yeah, so there's actually, I think, 2 answers to that question. But the first part of the question is often, it's quite funny. I actually do get a lot of clients that come to me and they're very frustrated in the beginning because they've tried to do it themselves. They've tried to call the number on the building and the person's not getting back to them. They've tried to set up tours and the person's not getting back to them, or the other agents talking a language that they just don't understand. So it's quite funny when you mention that about people trying to do it on their own. It's very common, and especially now online, there's a lot of listings that people can have access to.
Yeah.
And so, they very much do try it on their own. And And that's fine. It's quite enjoyable when they come to us and realize that we are here, that we can help them. So when it comes to the commission part of the question, well, the commercial world is a little bit like the wild, wild west. There's absolutely no standard at all. Over my many years, there's been completely different amounts with huge ranges. And then even on top of that, there's landlords out there that refuse to pay anything, which seems a bit surprising, but absolutely there's landlords that refuse to pay. And then there's also agents that refuse to do a fair split. There's definitely no 50-50. Some do, absolutely. There's some fantastic agents that I absolutely love working with. I get excited when I see their name on a listing because I know that they're fair, they're reasonable, and they'll share. But there are a lot of agents out there that do not. So that's interesting. And as a result, for us, our brokerage, we always work on an agency agreement. So I can't put my overhead on in a lottery of, am I going to be getting paid? So we do everything in an agency agreement. Everything is upfront. This is what our fee is so that we can cover everything. But it's always agreed upfront. This is what it is. Every time we put an offer in, we will 100% try our best to get it from the landlord or the vendor, whoever it is for whatever the transaction. So we always put it up and say, this is what our fee is. And there has been times over the years that we've had to go back to our clients with the difference and say, this is what our fee is. This is what they're going to pay. This is the difference. But we tell them while we're writing the offer. So it becomes part of the negotiation process of the math of how they want to offer, knowing that they're going to have to pay a little bit to us.
Yeah.
And then many times they don't have to pay us anything. There is enough. But there's enough times that there's very little to no fee that we have no choice but to put it in our agency agreement. And what that means is when we get the people that come to us saying oh, hey, if you have 5,000 square feet and here and that, can you let me know and give me a call? And I'm sure, not really, because if you're not willing to sign the agency agreement with me of what I can do, then it's scary for me to go out there and spend all the time for people if there's a good chance I don't get paid. And I just can't really. I think that would be bad business practice.
That would definitely be a bad business model.
Or it would be an excellent charity. So maybe one day I'll be able to do all the things for people for free. But at the moment, it is a wild, wild west, and everything is based on an agreement.
So that being said, if someone was hiring not only yourself, but what would you say is a reasonable range? I mean, obviously you'd want 100% would be a great range, but I mean, for somebody who is thinking to hire, whether it be you or somebody else or whomever, what would you say is a reasonable middle of the road range
for a fee?
Yeah, for a fee to hire a professional, because obviously you said some charge way high, some real low. What would you say is between here and here, give or take? Yeah,
absolutely. So on the commercial leasing side, I've seen all sorts of things. I've seen where it's $1 per square foot per year. I've seen where it's 1 month rent. I've seen a percentage of. We do our sort of a percentage on the first year of gross receipts, and then the remainder. Ours typically work out to around 1 month to 1.5 months gross rent.
Okay.
So that's your base and your additional rent. That is typically what it works out to. I'd say based on a 5-year term. So basically 5 years, you're looking at about just over 1 month's rent. And if you're a 10-year term, it's about 2 months rent. But obviously there's a huge variation before and after that. That's just kind of seems like the middle of the road, a good number. And then when it comes to sales, I'd say when we're looking at high millions, kind of looking at that kind of thing, then you're looking at the lower percentage.
Yeah.
1-2%, but they're a much higher number than if you're just going to look at a house.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're looking at the smaller ones, a retail store, kind of that's more aligned with actually the residential numbers, I'd say.
Okay.
I'd say it's absolutely more aligned with what you would typically see with your on the first 100 and then the remaining balance.
Yeah.
So sort of anything under under the million mark, I'd say it's pretty similar.
Okay.
On that side.
Oh, that's definitely good to know, because I'm sure people have no idea. I mean, as I said, you're the first commercial on our show, so people are listening to probably learning a whole bunch of stuff today.
There you go. Well, the sales side, I would say, is like a lot more normalized in the sense of makes sense. It's the leasing that's the wild west. It's the leasing component that is just nuts.
Yeah.
On that side, yeah.
Okay, well, that's cool then. So now, people who are looking to invest, what are some of the things that they should take into account, and sort of to give you sort of a baseline? When we're looking at rentals, a lot of times we're looking at who's around, who's our rental pool. You know, is it close to a higher learning, mass transit, shopping, stuff like this, right? Depending, of course, on the product, right? Like, if it's, when I say schools, that alone is between the two products. If it's a 2-bedroom, then obviously near an elementary school would be great, because, you know, mom, dad, kid, that sort of thing. Whereas if we're closer to Douglas College, 1-bedroom, sure, whichever. Or, you know, and if you switch them around, 1-bedroom close to an elementary school, not really caring. Right. So if you're looking to invest in a commercial space, what would you say, and since we've been using a retail for most of our examples here, what would you say you're looking for? I know you touched on parking as one, so I'm assuming that.
Yeah, well, that all depends. Are you looking to, I'm going to assume that you're going to just look to invest. So you're not looking to use it. You're just looking to put your money somewhere and get money back.
Exactly.
So geographically, it really doesn't matter. You're really just looking on your return on investment and sort of the cap rate that kind of comes with that. So which is just like a mathematical equation based on the net operating income of how much money is returning back to you after a year of the building. So when it comes to investments, you're really just looking at, is this going to pay me back? Is this going to, on that as like your main, your number one is this going to make money?
Yeah.
And then it depends on how much you want to get involved. Is this a building that I want to have pride in, that I can drive by and I can see it? Well, then you probably want it in an area that's close to you, that you can drive by, or maybe even be a part of it, pick up the rent. I don't know. But if you want to be a completely hands-off investor and you really just want the money, then it really just comes down to just a mathematical equation on that side. And if we're going to focus on the retail, then obviously you'd want to pick a community that has a lively retail. I probably, there's a few communities out there right now with several less than ideal retail buildings in the area. Maybe I wouldn't want to go for one that has like a high vacancy. I'd want to be pushing for one that has stable occupancy, a good business community around it, maybe some local transit that people can get to easily for the retail shop. So definitely your first thing is the dollar amount for the investment. And then, the ancillary items, that would be for sure, can people get to your retail store? Is it in a thriving area? That kind of thing. And also just even the age of the building and the state that the building's in. How much money are you going to have to put into the building to be able to bring it up? So like I don't know if you've picked up on it, but with the commercial side, everything really just answers with like, it depends. And there's so many variables. So there are so many reasons why it could be one thing or the other thing. So even in everything I've said today, it maybe could be wrong for someone else, because it really depends on the full situation on that. So I know it's very annoying, and I know it's annoying for many of our clients too, because we're not trying to dodge the answers, but it's just there's so many variables that could make the reason one way or the other.
Yeah, you kind of almost sound like a lawyer.
Yeah, well,
I believe so.
Absolutely. And I think it was a lawyer in one of our very first classes decades ago for myself that did teach us that every answer in commercial real estate really is, it depends. And that is pretty much what we live by.
Now, you talked about looking for places that are thriving. Off the top of your head, are there any that stick out that somebody's thinking about opening a retail? They should think about a random city here or there? Any ones that stick out to you? Like, is Surrey firing right now, or Langley, or any?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. No, there is. I'd say definitely Surrey. Like, we had a couple listings there over the last little bit, and there was a lot of interest in the Surrey retail. There were a lot of businesses, a lot of small businesses that were wanting to come. It was really good. There was a lot of interest that was there. And even where we were leasing around us in the neighborhood, there were no vacancies. So, well, it did make it harder to come up with comparables because you don't have the on that side, although we can get the inside information, but there's no active listings. And I would say that was kind of a good area that had a lot of stuff happening. And then Coquitlam also has quite a lot of retail spaces in that side that are pretty good, pretty active.
Okay.
So it's good. Yeah.
Now, you just touched on comparables. Where can you find some? Like, I'm sure you can't just walk into the guy next door and be like, show me your books. Right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
How do you find these? What are you comparing?
Yeah. So we have a couple different commercial tools and a couple different things on the back end that we can research and pull up. Also, we're tracking everything of what's going on. So as new information is coming out, we're holding on to a database to track everything there to be able to see it. And also just different relationships with key agents in each city. So as something comes up, it's simply just, we're all in the same community. It's an easy phone call to say, like, what are you seeing on that side? So in the residential world, I know there are many, many of you on that side. But when it comes to us in the commercial, we often see each other over and over, and it's the same agent. So it makes it much easier to be able to call a person down the street and say, hey, Haze, like, how's it going in your neighborhood today? Like, what are you seeing or what's going on? And we've built the trust over the years that it's okay to share the information. And
a little bit more collaborative, eh?
Yeah, a little bit on that side. Whether or not they're giving me the full, like, real goods or not, we're taking it with a grain of salt. There's always a little bit of inflated one way or the other. But yeah, it's just a combination of the different tools, the individual databases, and reaching out.
All right. So now you did touch on looking for places that don't have a lot of vacancies. I've been noticing driving through it because I, drive through all these cities going to my various listings and showings and whatnot. So we always cut through the main drags of them. And I'm noticing a lot more signs coming up. Yeah. Is this just directly from the inflation or the interest rates, or what do you think is driving this?
The high vacancies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So there's a lot of different reasons why I think the vacancies are coming up. Mm-hmm. So definitely, if you have, say for example, you have a tenant who's been in a space and maybe they were really lucky in the beginning. They had signed a 5-year lease with a couple options. And so they've been there for 10 years. And over the last kind of 10 years, they've had like a very minimal amount of increase. Well, in the last 4 to 5 years, we've had significant changes happen in our world. And a lot, like, inflation is huge, and a lot of the operating costs and everything has just skyrocketed. So when people are going to renew their leases now, you're finding there's a good chunk of tenants that are just outpriced. They can't be there. So just to speak in easy numbers, let's say someone has a small space and their rent is like $5,000 a month, and they've been there for 10 years, and maybe their rent started out at like $4,000. It's been like a slow steady increase. Well, in 2024, there's no way with property taxes, insurance, and operating costs that the landlord could even give that price again. Yeah. So now the tenants are going for renewal, and their lease is no longer $5,000. It's now like $8,000. Yeah. Well, along the way, those like 10 years in business, the owner has been operating the same way. They haven't been making changes to plan for the future. Okay. Then all of a sudden they get to the future and they can't afford it. Yeah. So you hear these tenants and their stories about being priced out of the space, which is really hard to hear when, you go as a customer there, and you go there all the time and you love it and you have the memories and you're like, why can't everything stay the same? But it's like, if you were to have a time capsule of what did gas cost you 5 years ago,
Yeah, right.
It's different. And so it's really hard. So I think that's one component of the ones that are getting kind of priced out. I think that over the years, we charged what we charged as a business and didn't plan. And I think that's a common thing with most businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I do it with myself. My prices today are based on all of my operating costs today. If you give me a significantly higher cost tomorrow, you're not going to survive on that side. So I think that's part of it. I think that also just demographics.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of aging businesses with like the individual owners that are retiring on that side. And then when it comes to retail, or you have anything that is basically based on discretionary income, well, our society as a whole, we're like lacking in discretionary income. And as a result, the businesses are struggling. And then I also think because each person's lease ends in different intervals, that since COVID, there's been like a massive shift in our society of what people are wanting to do or not wanting to do. So you have offices that have shifted to go work from home. So when their lease naturally comes up, it's not that they've broken the lease or ended it, but it's just their lease is over. They're reflecting and they don't need the space. Or even the retail, like when their lease comes up, they're reflecting and they're like, I can actually just do all of this online instead. So I think there's so many reasons why there's vacancies. I think people have a lot of theories or like visions of all these people uproared, like running away from their vacancies and it being a negative thing. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of like natural reasons why the things have ended, and our society just hasn't shifted yet to be able to come up with ways to use the space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you're talking about the leases going up in price and all that. Various cities have discussed about putting a restriction in it, much like they do for residential, where there's a prescribed amount. This is the max you can raise your rent. That's it. They've been talking about adding this to commercial. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it should be tweaked? Do you think it's absolute madness? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts for sure. But I think when you look at even just the first part with the operating costs in general, many of the operating costs we can't really control. The insurance costs, the property taxes, the utilities, all of that stuff is through the roof. So I know even from tenants and clients that I've worked with who I've put in places like less than a year ago almost, or just over a year ago, where they've been getting these notices of these huge increases. Well, at the end of the day, the huge increase that has come to them and almost like 40% increase their rent, none of that was the base rent to the landlord. That was all operating. In fact, it was all property taxes. So the idea of capping just kind of seems a bit like madness to me, in the sense of, well, there's two kind of parts of this. One is like free market. Mm-hmm. People are buying these as investments. I couldn't imagine the headline of, in your industry, someone owning a house and the government come and you're ready to sell it, say, and the government come to you and say, I'm sorry, Haze, you're not allowed to sell that house for more than $400,000. Mm. You're capped. You're not allowed to sell. There would be massive uproar if all these people that bought houses years ago as investments, because all these commercial owners didn't buy yesterday. Yeah. So they've bought under this notion of free market of investments. Yeah. So I can't even comprehend if the government came and told me, hey, you're trying to sell your house, just so you know, you can only cap it at that for the investment part. Yeah. And I get it. The rent is different. But the rent that they're getting each month, that is their investment part on that side. And another really, unfavorable point of view is that when it comes to residential, people have an entitlement to have a place to live. Yeah. You have the right to have a place to live. So when it comes to the capping the rent, people need to have homes. They need to be able to afford it. It is your human right to have a place to live, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
When it comes to commercial, it's not really your right to own a business or to have a business. It's wonderful and it's like a great bonus, but there's no human right that says you must be allowed to have a business. So I think to kind of combine them under the same umbrella is a bit not really, doesn't really sit well with me, because they're not the same. Nobody is like, you're not forced to like, you have to rent it to this person. Like, they have the right to have the business. So I have a really hard time with these notions. I really struggle with them. I think that if you want to make rent a little bit more affordable when it comes to commercial, I really do think that there's a way to kind of look at it to also, again, another unpopular opinion. Your people are not going to like me, but why are we not taxing home-based businesses? So to kind of alleviate some of the costs. I mean, like, so instead of just saying landlords are, you know, the evil people that need to cap what they're charging, why are we not figuring out other ways to kind of bring revenue so that they don't have to charge as much when it comes to the operating costs on that kind of thing? So I just think COVID has taught us since then, with a lot of businesses moving home, there's a lot of big businesses working from home.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's just Tupperware, makeup, or whoever. There are real, legitimate, solid businesses earning way more than probably us working from home. So why are they not part of the overall tax situation to help out? Why are they just free of this? So I think it's a way bigger picture. I think way longer than we have time for, but I'm super passionate about it, obviously. But I just think there's so much that's misunderstood in this sense. I think people just think the landlord's taking all the money from me, and they're not understanding that a good chunk of that is for operating or just the base on that side. So
is that the same reason that, like, you see a lot of these vacancies, sometimes they're vacant for a year? Is the landlord not concerned about renting that? Like, I know that on the residential side, if you had a place that wasn't rented for a year, landlord would be losing their marbles about this.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be that for commercial. Can you touch on that about how can that stay like that?
Yeah, so there's different reasons, but it really just comes down to opportunity costs in the sense that they don't want to panic to put someone in at too low of a rate if the market is if it's going to shift. So right now there is kind of a big disconnect between what tenants believe they should be getting and what landlords believe they should be getting. Tenants see empty spaces and think, hey, my hat store is perfect there. Nobody's rented it. I should rent it. But I want to rent it for $1. Yeah. And you're lucky to get my $1 is kind of where the tenant comes from. And the landlord is like, hey, I've gone through this rodeo before. I've seen this. I know that in a couple of years, the rents will be higher and it's worth waiting.
Okay.
So that's one reason. Another reason is you see the vacancies, but they could be negotiating. So I actually have a listing that's been up for a long time. I get calls all the time, but we have been negotiating for months. So from the outside world, it may look like it's for lease. I really hope coming up that it will no longer be for lease. But that's just part of the due diligence that we've been going through. So it appears vacant for a long time, but it's not. And then a third thing could be the building itself requires so many upgrades that it would cost more to bring the building to code than it would to put a tenant in.
Okay.
So there's even buildings we have actually on Columbia Street in New Westminster where the building itself, it would cost more for the owner to have to put in sprinklers and earthquake and all the different things to do it. It just doesn't make sense. So right now it's sort of a holding property for them to whether or not they're planning for developments down the road. And then developments take a long time as well.
Yeah, of course.
So often it may appear the landlord's sitting on vacant land or unleased unit and not doing anything. But often there's like work behind the scenes that's going on that everything in real estate for commercial is confidential on that side.
Yeah.
Which is why most people don't know what we do when we do it, and we can't share it until months or years later until it's done. So yeah, so that's where there's like a big disconnect, and it happens all the time.
Now, you said that like you're dealing with one that there's negotiations going on over months. Is this a typical thing, or do they normally run a little quicker, or do they normally run longer? Like, what's your typical, or is there a typical negotiation time?
Yeah, so, well, the negotiation time typically would be a lot faster than what I'm seeing. We're on a little bit of a joyride for that, but commercial is definitely longer than residential. Even the whole process is. Yeah. When somebody comes to me and they want to find something, I tell them we need to plan for 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 to 9, depending. Now, that's for your basic parameters, nothing wacky. Yeah. Your basic. That seems like a good window. Sometimes we find something right away, super magical. Sometimes it takes longer. And the longer it takes, it's usually because of the parameters that people have. Then when it comes to negotiating, or when it comes to an offer to lease, usually 10 days to 14 days is what we would use. Now, business days. So 2 to 3 weeks is typically would be a good negotiation to come back. And that's because unlike the residential where maybe you're at home with the homeowner and you're able to do a quick call back and forth, we're dealing with businesses that have board of directors that are often in different time zones. So we have to allow a couple days, business days, for it to get to the other side. They have to review it and then get back. So doing the like actual offer is usually 2 to 3 weeks. Then when it gets to the due diligence, I like to see it within like 30 days. Mm-hmm. But depending, if someone needs an environmental, that's going to add, you're going to get 60, 90 days by the time if you have to go through the different stages. Okay. And then if you're dealing with national brands, then often the real estate lawyers like to pick apart every sentence in a lease. So then that takes longer as well. Yeah. So the conditional period can definitely take longer, like 1 month to 6 months, somewhere in there. I like to see like 2 and less months would be ideal. But it's hard to, sometimes hard to move quickly, and it just depends. Does the person purchasing have all their ducks in a row? Yeah. And then when it comes to buying different places, just the different inspections, unlike a home inspector where it's like one, sometimes there's different people that have to come in depending if they're going to use it or invest it. Again, depends. All the different things,
always depends.
Yeah. But it is a much longer process. Yeah. So on that side, and even with our clients, we probably average 6 to 9 months. Okay.
So now, with these vacancies and that, what are some of the key strategies for marketing a commercial listing? So if you're owning it, how what's the best way to go about marketing it?
Yeah. So even right now, great example, we have great space in North Vancouver at Quayside Plaza. A little plug for retail, possibly an office. So reach out. I can let you know more. But no, in all seriousness. So we do have like an internal communication between all the commercial real estate agents in BC. So we have like this email blast. So I can blast it out to every single commercial agent directly in their inbox, which is pretty cool. Because they don't have to search for me. I literally say, hey, look at me, which is kind of nice. And then typical like space list, which is great because anyone can kind of go on it as well. So even general population can go and peruse and reach out and submit questions. So that brings the people that want to do it themselves. So that when they come to us, they're very proud that they found us through the site. We usually direct them, or not usually, we always direct them to find their own representation, but it's a great way. Tried and true tested method, signage on the building works amazing. The amount of phone calls just from like something simple, doesn't need to be great fancy sign. Your phone number, anyone will call you. And then again, back to those connections talked about earlier with the individuals that we call and ask. I literally just reach out to them and send them a direct email. Saying like, hey, Haze, like, remember we always talked about rates and stuff together. Like, here's a listing if you know something. Yeah. Because even though they made it the rule in, what was it, June 2018, that you can't double end, I still never wanted to do it anyways. So it's way better just to reach out and be like, hey, do you know someone on that side? And then depending on the space, we will actually target tenants. So if we think this space would be perfect for, say, a yoga studio, we will actually reach out to the yoga community, different people, and say, are you looking to expand? Do you want a second location?
Oh, okay.
Do you know anyone within your industry that wants it? So we will actually sit down and brainstorm like what could be useful for this space, and we will target the actual users.
So do you get a couple of those 3 a.m. calls like, hey man, we should buy a bar?
Yeah.
Do you get a couple of those on the bars that are closed down?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. I do get a lot of random, or people that people have no idea, all good intentions, and they walk by one of our locations with our for lease sign, and they will call us at 11 o'clock and ask a most ridiculous question. And they have no idea what they're even looking at. But yeah, no, we do get it. But we do talk to everyone. You never know where they're going to end up.
Yeah, you only need one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the misconceptions about the commercial market? Like, I know we've touched on quite a few things, but in a nutshell, like say maybe your top 3 misconceptions about the commercial market, how it works, or really anything that's just on your chest, man. What's burning?
Okay. I would say one is just people, there's like a big assumption about that it's easy in the sense of business. It's easy. Like when, as we had touched on before, there's a vacancy, it should be easy. I should just be able to call and make it happen.
Yeah.
Also another big one is people assuming that the landlord is lucky to have them. Now, there's a lot of great quality tenants, but there's a lot of reasons why landlords may or may not lease certain things to certain uses.
Yeah.
And so I do get it. I actually have space right now that I have this one type of user that keeps calling me and just demanding to get into the space, and he should have it. And I was like, the landlord doesn't want your use of space. And the fact that the landlords have control over who uses the space. So
yeah.
I think that kind of leads into another problem of a misconception is like, well, in New West, we have, 18,000 pharmacies, and about half as many dentists.
They've got a lot of dentists coming.
Yeah, so we have all the dentists, all the pharmacies, which is fantastic. For those who need it, no one should not have a dentist in New West. Yeah. But the misconception that there's people blaming the city about like the city allowing it, but it really just comes down to the landlord on that side.
Yeah.
And so that's a bit interesting when I hear it just out and about people mad, like, why is the city allowing this, or why do the cities allow that? It's like the cities have zoning for each area, and there's dozens of people and businesses that can go in there. It just happens to be the same users on every corner. Yeah. But so that's a thing I've always found kind of interesting. Just a misconception of who controls the type of use on that side. So,
which might be a slippery slope too. Start getting too involved, and all of a sudden, when they have X amount of whatever. And
absolutely. But the landlord wants to. So like if I have a commercial complex that has like 6 different units in it, as a landlord, I'd want to make sure it was a cohesive 6. So that the person's coming to be able to support each of the stores on that side. So you'd want to make sure that each one complements each other and you're not fighting. Like I'm not going to put 2 pizza stores side by side. I want enough diversity in the businesses, and I want to have businesses that's going to draw people. So the dentist is great because you'll draw them in, the parent will drop off the kid, and then they can go get a coffee and maybe grab a book or something. So so there's all different kind of things that go into the process. But
like you keep the marijuana shop beside the bakery?
Yeah.
Or 7-Eleven?
Yeah, it totally works. Totally works. Yeah. We have a building that there's a cannabis shop and a donair shop and a pizza shop. It's heaven. It's a good mix.
Good combo. Right?
Yeah. Maybe the gas station next to it isn't the best, but there's a bit of a mix of different things. Yeah.
Right on. So we're running pretty much out of time here. If someone's trying to get a hold of you to go further into your vast knowledge, how can they find you?
Well, absolutely. You can find me online on my website, which I think you'll be putting down below.
Yeah, we'll have all the information.
Yeah,
in the
phone number,
description.
text, email. You can stop by my office in North Van. I'm usually at my North Van office, although we do have a New West. But another part of my business we didn't really touch on is we also have in-house maintenance, janitorial staff. So they all come to my North Van office, so that's why I go there all the time. But I'm usually in North Van or phone, email, text.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening. If you did find anything useful, please be sure to like and subscribe us so you don't miss any of the other shows. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.